button. And as soon as Okay, so as I said, this is the first of our Zoom info sessions for WA Wines to the World. WA Wines to the World, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is a program that is steered by industry. So that's in conjunction with Wines of Western Australia, and is backed by state government, being DPIRD. So DPIRD and Wines of Western Australia jointly are engaged in a 5-year export growth program, which we've renamed WA Wines to the World. The objectives of this program are to increase our West Australian wine exports, the volume and the value, and to also increase the number of producers that are successfully exporting. So it's a 5-year program, and essentially it's a $6 million program, 50% funded by industry and 50% by state government. Hydra Consulting has been engaged to program manage the WA Wines to the World 5-year program. We've just been through a process of essentially building strategy and determining target markets, target sales channels for the program, etc. And we are at the point now where we are in implementation. So the purpose of the program update part of this info session is to let you know exactly where we're up to guide you through our resource, which is called the WA Wine Exportal, and show you where all of our market activations across our target markets are posted for your information. So today, if anyone has any sessions, if you can just initially perhaps raise them in chat, and then at the end we can address those questions, or you can just save them for a live Q&A at the end. The info session is going to be broken up into the program update part of session, which will be run for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then I'll hand over to Lena Emilianova from Hillebrand, who is going to give us some very practical insights for Western Australian wine exporters on shipping and logistics. And essentially our info sessions that we will hold over the course of the year will be structured in the same way. We'll have an opportunity for a program update and for any questions and answers along those lines, and then we'll move straight into a topic of interest to WA wine exporters. So I'll move straight into it. I would like to first bring to your attention, I hope everyone can see that on their screen. You should now be viewing our WA Wine Exportal. So it's wineexportal.info. This was one of the first milestones, if you like, that Hydra Consulting had to deliver against this program, is to bring together a collection of useful resources for exporters. Without reinventing the wheel, what we have done is essentially draw on resources that already exist from Wine Australia, from DPIRD, from Austrade, from a variety of different sites, and bring them all together in one place where Western Australian wine exporters can benefit. So the way that this website is structured, you've essentially got these icons on the first page that are representing the export journey. So we take you through that export journey. You can click on the icons to access information relating to that specific area. So as an example, today we're covering shipping and logistics. If you want some information on those areas, you would normally just click here. And as you can see, there's some additional areas there that you can link through to, and additional resources that you can download. So that's how we have structured the Wine Exportal. What I would like to really highlight today is a new addition And before I do that, and I will have a slide at the very end which gives you all the contact details for the program, and also mention some of the website details. But I will say that to access the WineX portal, you do need a password, and the password is Global Growth, all one word with capital G's. So I'll put that up on the screen at the end as well. And also everyone that's participating today will be sent a copy of this presentation. So what I would like to go straight into is our activations. So top right menu screen there, click on activations, and then you'll be asked to enter the password again, Global Growth. And here you will have access to our landing page for all of our international market activations. Essentially what we've done in building these activations is we've obviously looked at our target markets, our target sales channels, and also the types of activations and audiences that our participants of the program, our West Australian wine exporters, want to engage with. And we have developed a program that is very well-rounded in terms of activities and initiatives for both new exporters and existing exporters in market, with the view that we achieve some really practical sales outcomes. We do have some sort of above the line brand awareness, West Australian promotions and regional wine promotions, but the vast majority of our programs are very commercial in their nature and very much focused on sales outcomes for our producers that are getting involved. So as a starting point, we do have some global activations. These are things that essentially you can get involved with as a wine producer or as a region that affect or cut across a number of different markets. So as an example, we're subsidising Wine Australia's Australian Wine Connect Expo space, both for individual producers and for regions, and also a number of other activations here. One that I would like to point out, which we're going to be putting a little bit more information out there very shortly on, is the Wine Intelligence Global Consumer Data. This is where you can access some really comprehensive consumer data that has been gathered together by Wine Intelligence, which is really the leader in this field, in this industry. So we've focused in on our target markets of the USA, the UK, Japan, Singapore, Canada, and Hong Kong. And you really, with the ability to access all of this data, means that we can shape our programs for the consumers that actually matter to Western Australian wines. We can really start looking at getting down into the data and developing programs that have some cut through and are very, very targeted. So that's why we've purchased this data. At the end of each of these activations, there is the ability for producers to get in and send an expression of interest, register their interest, or get involved. With the Wine Intelligence data, we also have the ability to on-sell the data to up to 9 other participants, whether they be producers or regions. And the beauty of that is that then anyone participating in that activation will have access to unfettered, complete data. We are allowed to use the data in a more limited way to, in terms of conveying and communicating to our audiences, and we can convey the key points. We can also use it to shape our program, but what we can't do is reproduce reports and provide those. So for anyone that wants to participate in a more full way, they can do that. So I'm not going to go through every one of these activations today. I just want to show you that there are a number of global activations which regions and producers can participate in. So the idea is to get in after this info session and have a really good look around all of the activations. Aside from global activations, we have specific market activations. So if you have an interest in a specific market, you can delve in a little bit deeper. And again, I'm just going to show you one here for the UK. We've got roughly ordered chronologically, so anything that's really topical and relevant now, or it's got a date of urgency here and now, that will be showing at the top. So have a look in that order. And also, once again, at the bottom of each, you've got the ability to express your interest to join in the program and register. Where we have programs that are not yet fully fleshed out, you'll notice, I think we've got one down here, we've got the stamp work in progress. So what this means is that we are still working out all of the final costs and the details of the program, but we still put some indicative costs by and large, and hopefully some indicative timing and details on there, and enough that participants will be able to express their interest in those programs. So Darren, if you would like to jump in at any point, I'm going to hand over to Lena shortly, but if there's anything that I have missed in terms of key activations that we need to point out now, please let me know.
No, Liz, I think that's great. I'll just encourage people to have a really good look at this site, because we've also got a program for supporting people to submit wines. So on that Submit Wines page, there'll be upcoming opportunities to submit wines for shows or medals or events that are happening. We've got the Who Can Help page, which is just where you can go internationally. And we really would like your help. Most pages are password protected. There's only 2 that aren't with the global growth. And the other one is that we're wanting to collect the stories of Western Australian wines internationally. And so if anybody's got some stories that have been, that are available electronically on our stories page, I'll just click on the stories tab at the top there, Liz. On our stories page, we'll just be featuring those stories. And if anybody's got somebody who's got something really interesting to write about the West Australian wine sector, we will also be doing a little bit of paying people to write some stories about WA. So that's one of our activations. Yeah. So it's the New Voices content development. We're just looking for people who are telling, different ways of looking at Western Australian wines, people that have got interesting stories to tell, that are experienced writers that might be able to write about them, or someone that has a great story to tell that we might be able to write, not so much about producers, but about regions and Western Australia, and where we've got multiple wines that create part of that story. Because if we tell a story, we also want to be able to recommend some wines at the same time. And
so we'll wrap around to all of this at the very end of the info session as well, and let you know, if you haven't joined the program, how you can join and how you can get access to this information. But one of the things also with all of these market activations is we will be, as they become relevant and as we're working through the programs and calling on registrations and deadlines, we will be posting through our regular EDMs out to participants of the program as well. So keep a lookout for the regular EDMs. They'll highlight when something is topical and upon us. This is the background framework. So if you wish to get in there in your own time and have a look around and submit your registrations of interest, please do so. I think at this point, we need to hand over to Lena from Hillebrand, and she can, Lena, I'm just stopping the share screen so you can get on there now. So Lena is the Business Development Executive for Hillebrand and is going to be guiding us through the shipping and logistics session today. Welcome, Lena.
Thank you, Liz, and good morning, everyone. Let me just share my screen so that you can see the presentation. All right. Awesome. So everybody can see my presentation on the screens. That's good. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And big thank you to Wines of Western Australia for this opportunity to talk to you, because I used to visit Western Australia twice a year, but with the current situation, it's not longer available. So I'm very happy to be here. And very fortunate to have my teammate, Kerry, with me today. Kerry has been in the expert industry for a long time. And if we have extraordinary project to return 200 containers that was shipped to China. Carrie is the one that does it for us. So, sorry, just I'm going. And so happy to have her on board. So if you, while we're going with our info session, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat. We'll be happy to answer them at the end. And right, we starting with our agenda for today. So when we were discussing with Liz what would be beneficial for you guys to know about logistics, we sort of a few things that we might cover today. So we want to talk about Incoterms, in particular FOB and affiliated charges. We want to talk about container types, pallet configurations, FCL versus LCL shipments, cargo care, and challenges with FOB Fremantle shipments. So before we dive into this agenda, I just wanted quickly to give you a brief update what is happening in industry, just for you to be aware, and maybe when you're negotiating your contracts, you know what's happening globally. Due to lockdowns and industrial action, we see a lot of port congestions. On your right side, you can see a quick image of the number of vessels is currently waiting to offload in US West Coast. Obviously, all those vessels are not available to us to load the new cargo. Therefore, we have equipment and space shortage at the moment in Australia, which obviously delays your shipments. And just bear in mind, if you're planning to ship anything, 8 weeks or more is the booking leading time at the moment. Shipping lines have also introduced general rate increases, peak season surcharges, and congestion surcharges. This is obviously not applicable to suppliers if the shipment is sent under FOB terms, but just for your general information, your importers at the moment sometimes pay twice as much as they used to pay you know, a year and a half ago. So just to be updated on the landscape. If you have any questions, please send them via chat. We also have trade lane board on the X portal for you. So everything that is happening globally at the ports, you will be updated if you look at the logistics session on the X portal. All right, moving up to Incoterms. So you probably will already working with Incoterms, but just to outline that Incoterms in trading terms that are very important at the beginning of negotiating any contracts, because it defines risk, liabilities, and cost for logistics between seller and the buyer. They are revised every 10 years, and currently there are 12 Incoterms that are used globally. Australia is a predominantly FOB market. So everything that is shipped from Australia in terms of wine usually are based on FOB terms, where you as a seller only are responsible for putting the cargo on the vessel. And usually the importer, the buyer, arranges all the rest, including insurance. There are some affiliated costs involved with FOB charges that you have to be aware, and to make sure that you factor in all the costs in your calculation when you offer your FOB pricing. So when we look at the FOB charges, we usually, divide them into two blocks. So one are for full containers, the other one is for LCL shipments. So when you do your costing for your FOB price for your wines, you have to make sure that you factor in container transport, container packing, origin terminal charges, ISPS, bill of lading, pre-receival advice, export declaration, and a booking fee. This is basically is the main charges that will be invoiced to you under FOB terms. Different service providers name them differently or just provide you with a total sum, but this is something that you would definitely have in your quotes. Same for LCLs, except excluding the PRA and container packing, because it all sits in ocean freight for LCL shipments. So when you're doing any of your shipments under FOB terms, we would be recommending you to just request FOB pricing from the service provider, just to have a brief overview what to expect in terms of the cost for some particular shipments. The other term that I wanted to introduce to you today is FCA. Especially with the current climate, we see a lot of uncertainties around the ocean freight and how things being charged. So to be on the safer side, FCA is a good term to consider, because under FCA term, you're only responsible for delivering the cargo to nominated depot, and your importer is liable for all the other arrangements with the ocean freight. It's a really good term to use when you're dealing with someone that you haven't done before, just to because you don't really know how they arrange the freight. And also it will help you to minimize the risk of getting higher invoices, because the way decisions are made right now are very urgent, and sometimes you have a risk of receiving an inflated invoice for origin port charges. And also the other thing with this term, your importer will have a bigger picture of the all involved costs with the ocean freight, and will make more informative decision how to ship their cargo. So this is just a term to consider.
Lena?
So, yes?
I just have a question there, or a statement, I guess.
Yep.
So in my experience in wine exports, the vast majority of shipments would be FOB. The only time I've ever come across FCA is with the monopolies. So like the LCBO in Ontario, they will often ask you to ship on an FCA Adelaide basis. I understand what you're saying in terms of the reduced risk to producers, but I would caution producers at the same time that not to put obstacles in the way with your buyer if the industry standard is indeed FOB. And yes. Just one other quick note too is that if anyone comes to you asking for a CIF quote, it's generally a little bit more unusual and means that they more often than not are more of a trading company, perhaps with less experience in importing wines, and that should raise a bit of a red flag. Because FOB is kind of the standard.
Thank you, Liz. Yes, you're right. FOB is a standard term, but we see the switch to FCA. I'm not sure it's about Western Australia, but in South Australia, we definitely see the switch, especially when you ship into Asian countries and you want to minimize your risk. But with the long term, importers, buyers, obviously FOB is a term, if they're comfortable, FOB is a term to use. It's just, it's good to have this option if you don't want to get involved in ocean freight. And it's obviously up to your sales team to see if it's applicable in this contract or not. All right. So once you've decided on how you're going to ship under which terms, we are getting closer to what equipment type you will be required for your shipments. There are basically 4 types of containers. Most commonly used is a 20-footer. We see the tendency with shipping lines that they are trying to introduce more a 40-footer equipment volume due to cost efficiency, and it's more environmentally friendly. So we'll see that happening more over the years. But for now, 20-footers is the most commonly used one. If you look at the reefer containers, they are also used, but more rarely. they're used only for sensitive wines or on specific routes. Usually we recommend to put a temperature at 15 degrees for wines, and also check with your buyer if, or advise your buyer if the genset is required at destination. Usually in Australia, we don't use genset for pre-carriage, but for some regions, especially if wine is going to France, at destination, we would be usually putting the reefer container on a jet set during our inland move. Okay. We also wanted just to touch on the concept of verified gross mass. This concept was introduced by Maritime Organization. And basically, you can't load any container unless its verified gross mass has been declared. And the verified gross mass usually consists of the combined container tire weight, the weight of the cargo, including all the packaging. And there are two ways of calculating it. For Western Australia, we usually use method number 2. So the method number 1 is just weighting the actual container. And method number 2 is by calculation. We can assist the shipper with VGM calculations, or we can provide a facility that would be doing the actual weighting. We need VGM to receive a pre-receival advice and to be able to get to the wharf. Therefore, this is a very important part, and the information has to be accurate. When we talk about weights in shipping, there are certain terminology that we use. So we just wanted to quickly touch on that as well. So when we talk about cargo net weight, it's a total weight of the product. And when we talk about cargo gross weight, it's a product and all the packages, bottles, cans, and cartons and pallets. Same applies to container weight. So the container net weight will be the cargo gross weight, and then the gross weight of the container will be the total weight of the cargo plus the tire. And the tire weight is an empty container weight, and each container has a plate that shows a plate load, so you can't load more than the shown on the plate to minimize your risks. Weights are also important during transportation, inland transportation. So we have this a chain of responsibility law that was introduced in 2018, and for Western Australia, the cargo should be approximate 24.5 tons. Some of the carriers can have an exemption and permits to up to 30 tons, but it has to be all done through the Department of Transport of Western Australia. And this is just an example of the tire weight for you for consideration.
Lena, can I just point out where that might be relevant for people,
sure.
For producers? If you're lucky enough that you have a full container order coming from a customer and they're looking at a 40-foot container, you might work out everything that you can fit your wines into this 40-foot container and that everything fits quite nicely, but unless it meets those weight requirements for transport, you'll be in trouble. So it might be that you can't fully load up a 40-foot container with wines and there will be restrictions. So I've come across that before with Chinese orders in particular. And of course, every country's a little bit different, aren't they, Lena, in terms of the transport weights?
Yes.
So
Yeah, that's that's what I wanted to mention, in particular USA. So even though you are able to load locally some certain amount of cargo in your container, but you have to make sure that inland, the own carriage will be safe and within the requirements. And you're right, especially some destinations, and it's something you could check in advance to make sure that your weight is within the limits. Okay, moving forward. Pallets. So with pallets, there is no global standardized size for pallets. So there are basically three types: US pallets, Euro pallets, and Asian pallets. US pallets, sometimes also called Euro 2 pallets, which are more commonly used in Australia. We recommend the weight of the pallet not exceeding of 1,000 kg. The reason behind that is the handling process is more safe when it's no more than 1,000 kilograms. With pallets, all the pallets have to be have an ISPM 15 in order to go smoothly through all the customs clearance procedures at destination. When we pack our containers, so we send any shipments, we make sure that all the pallets that we receive are fumigated, otherwise we won't be able to send. And if it's if it's even sent, it will have a high chance of being stuck in a quarantine at destination. And it's also kind for the planet to do that. If you don't want to, yep.
Sorry, just one more thing, which I think might be of relevance. How often do you see, or is it correct to say that the standard Australian, what we sometimes think of as an export pallet, but it's a standard Australian format built to fit the Australian railways, and that's an 1165 by 1165 two-way pallet. A lot of smaller producers will have their products loaded onto those pallets as a standard. And whilst that may be fine to deliver on those pallets for LCL shipments, which I believe you're going to talk about, less than container load, the vast majority of full container load shipments will in fact prefer one of the smaller format pallets because they can fit more on the floor of the container. So would you always reload from one of the Australian standard pallets onto one of those international format pallets in a full container load situation? Would you see that?
It all depends. It all depends on the case. So we would probably need to reload some of the pallets to fit in, not all of them. Also, if the other thing is that if at destination they're happy to accept those pallets, like those Australian standard pallets, then we can work around it. But it's also about how many you can fit in a container and if they are fumigated. So in general, it's all possible. It's just overall, it's a better practice to use USA standard pallets.
And so probably best for people to check with their customers what their preference is as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And because overall, this is where the stock is going, and this is if it's comfortable for them to offload the cargo once they receive it. All right, so we also have an option of sending plastic pallets, but obviously they have a longer lifespan, they're more eco-friendly, but they're only cost efficient if you are able to organize a return, which rarely happens because we're so remote. So it's just an option maybe for, I don't know, some shipments when you're shipping to your entity overseas and they can, it then utilize this, etc. But also an option maybe to consider. The other options that we currently have are slip sheets. Slip sheets usually made of plastic or strong cardinal. They're really good because they're very efficient to load. So the time you spend offloading cargo on a slip sheet could be less by 60%. And obviously you can fit more cargo because you eliminated this pallet volume that you have when you put it on a standard pallet. The only downside with slip sheet is that you have to have an equipment to offload them once it arrives at destination. So not every buyer or importer has this equipment. Therefore, before slip sheeting anything, it has to be from your importer side, if they are ready to accept this cargo at their premises.
More often than not, I find that the only requests for slip sheets we come across in the wine industry are with the big buyers, so the big retail chains and the monopoly buyers in Canada and the Nordic countries. They'll often request the slip sheets.
Yep, because obviously they really look precisely at their costings. Therefore, they want to fit as much as possible and move it and offload as quick as possible. So yeah, that's right. All right, just a quick overview for the container loading capacity. So usually in a 20-footer, you would load 10 US pallets. Each of them will have maximum 4 layers. If you want to put some on top, usually no more than 3 high. But it also depends on your carton size. Same with reefer containers. You can put 10 US pallets or 11 Euro pallets. Reefer containers, they're smaller in internal dimensions, so it will be case by case. You'll have to check how many more pallets you can fit on top. So usually we have all this information available on Exportal, but if there is a inquiry and you want to understand how many cargo you can fit, you can always check it with your service provider, because they have this ability to calculate this for you and make sure that you allow yourself enough space in a container and not reaching the limits. All right. So when we're talking about FCL versus LCL shipments, first thing that we have to consider is the shipment volume. Obviously, from our experience, Western Australia has less volume, and it's usually LCL shipments that are few pallets are shipped. So with LCL shipments, you have to think about cargo security, because not every service provider knows how to handle wine, and you have to make sure that they understand that it's cannot go with any commodities. And this discussion that is important to have. Also, when you're deciding between shipping LCL or FCL, if you have something like 5 pallets or higher, it would be good to have 2 quotes from the service provider. It's just for some trade lines, having 5 pallets will be more cost efficient to send it via as a full container rather than LCL. So it's a really good practice to have. If you have 5 or more pallets, maybe if this is up to your importer, obviously, to decide which way to send, but if you can recommend them, this is a good thing to do. Also with LCL, you have to bear in mind that dates are very flexible and the transit times are longer, and usually there are transshipments involved. So if you need to send something urgent and you don't have enough volume, you have to just check with LCL shipments what would be the routing and what would be the transit time to make more informative decision. Okay. So when we talk about cargo care, obviously the best option for shipping sensitive wine would be shipping them in a reefer container. But most of the time it's not up to the seller to decide how this is going to be shipped. But on the other hand, it's really important that your wines arrive at the conditions you want them to be. So there's a few things that you can do to assist your importer or to raise a discussion about what would be the best way to handle your wines. If it's not addressed by your importer, you can initiate this dialogue. So first of all, it's transit times and routings. So if you're concerned that your wines might be affected by temperatures or humidity, then you can discuss this with your importer. The other thing is the temperature and humidity levels on the route. So we have this data available, so you can see what's the temperature like during this time of the year on this route and make more informative decision. And also container positioning on the vessel. Container positioning on the vessel is not guaranteed, but we at Hillebrand, for instance, because this is our niche and we ship wine products for so many years, every time we request a booking, we request the container to be stored in the area where they won't be affected by heat. And it's a standard procedure for us. For some service providers, it will be not the standard procedure. So this is something you can discuss with your importer. The other thing I wanted to mention is the implication of humidity and temperature on the wines during transportation. I will not go deep in those details at the moment, but you'll have it available on the slideshow. But this is something that your importer has to know before they proceed with shipment, because they are the ones that deciding how the wine is going to be transported. So if you have this discussion with them, that will be really beneficial and will probably help them to avoid some mistakes. This is just a graph that I've retrieved from our climate database, and it shows that how temperatures and humidity levels fluctuate during transportation, and the wine comfort zone is in the gray area of this graph. So this is something that you have to be aware and do some actions to minimize your risk for exposing your wines to these fluctuations. So if you can't influence the equipment type, you can't, change the routings or direction of your cargo. So the other thing you can mention to your importer is insulation. Insulation is the it's a system that we use. It's a liner that we use for any equipment type, and it protects your wines against thermal shock, extreme temperatures, humidity, infiltrations, container rain, condensation, cross-contamination, and bad smells. Insulation liners, they come for full containers. They are also available for pallets. So this is something that you can recommend to your importer to make sure your wines are protected. And if we look at this graph, this is just example for you when we send stock in a container that is insulated and how the insulation line actually maintains certain temperatures and protects the cargo from thermal shocks and humidity fluctuations. Usually we use data loggers that look like this, just to put inside of the pallet and in the middle of the pallet, on the top of the pallet. And those loggers, they allow us to determine what was the temperature during the routing and if there are any additional things we have to do to protect the wines from these temperature changes and humidity. So if you have any questions on Vinliners, on data loggers, please let us know. We can talk about that. And just to finalize, because I think I'm about to run out of the time, just to finalize today's session, we wanted to quickly touch base on the challenges with shipping FOB Fremantle that we see in our practice. Obviously, we have 3 major ports that are sending a lot of cargo and receiving a lot of vessels as well. That don't have as much issues as the smaller ports like Fremantle and Adelaide. So, oops, sorry. Sorry. So with challenges that we encounter when we are shipping a wine from Fremantle, usually it's a smaller quality quantity orders, which need to be consolidated with other cargo, and we have to move that cargo to bigger ports, and that obviously increases the transit time for the shipment. It's also inflates the freight rates. If something is shipped out of Fremantle, then we face issue of the frequency of the shipments. If something like if we are sending stuff to USA, then so if we are sending things to USA out of Melbourne, it's every week. Out of Fremantle, we'll be having a service fortnightly or even like once a month, depending on the surrounding. We also have to think about feeder vessels availability in Fremantle. So these are the main things. We also see that there's some limitation in the packing services. For instance, slip sheets not quite popular. Not a lot of facility offers this service. But we have this service in Fremantle. So if you require any assistance with that, we can definitely have a look into this. And that's pretty much all we wanted to talk about today. This is our contacts. So anything you might need from Expert Insight, please reach out anytime. And I think we have 15 minutes to go through the questions that we have in our chat.
Lena, can I just kick things off, just referring to your previous slide on the challenges ex-Fremantle.
Yep.
Just a word of advice for people that when you are quoting for export, make sure you don't just quote FOB, but you actually state FOB Fremantle. And you also make it very clear that you are shipping out of Fremantle in terms of your quotation. If you want to open up and be a little bit more flexible in terms of your supply, quite often a lot of importers will consolidate wine shipments out of Adelaide. Just be aware of your costs to get the product over there if you want to offer that as an alternative. With USA in particular, USA importers, they will often consolidate out of Adelaide and expect that you ship over. They may take that for granted, even if your quote is FOB Fremantle. So just be very explicit about your quotes, your terms, and understand your costs if you are going to move the stock over to Adelaide.
Just on that too, Liz. Hi, everybody. They might also want to take into consideration the time it will take to move the cargo from Fremantle to Adelaide. We just need to make sure that's made very clear to them that it will actually increase by about a week, sometimes up to 2 weeks. So they'll need to take that into consideration with the lead times, etc.
Yeah, no, really good point. Lena, just quickly, would you mind unsharing the screen, and we'll just pop up a final slide with all the contact details. Your contact details are on that one, of course. And then we'll take our questions. So does anyone have any questions for Lena or for Karen? That was by the way, that was a really informative session. I know sometimes shipping and logistics can be a bit of a dry subject, and I think you've done a great job putting that together and providing all of that information with those slides. Really, really practical stuff for our West Australian wine industry.
Thank you.
And yes, happy for anyone to fire any questions off. Just make sure if you are asking any questions that you unmute yourselves as well, just in case anyone's talking. If anyone wants to gather their thoughts, I do have a couple of extra points, which may also evolve into questions as well. One of the things I think that's a good reminder for people on the issue of shipping and logistics, there's a lot of information that's been presented today by Lena and Hillebrand. It's really good background information so that you understand what considerations there are for freight. Quite often these decisions, when you're quoting FOB, will not be your decisions, they will be your buyer's decisions. And so I would say if you're ever confused or feeling a bit overwhelmed by all the terminology, just simply go back to your buyer and say, look, who is their appointed freight forwarder? And who can you contact here in Australia and ask any questions? And if you have any questions for your buyer around, their choice of container type, their choice of pallets, slip sheets, etc., then you can always pose that question to the buyer. But it's really good to have that background and that understanding of how these decisions are made. And particularly if you've got newer startup importers that you're working with, not so experienced importers. So that's the point I would make about all of that information. And whether it's an LCL shipment or an FCL shipment, more often than not, that's the buyer's decision, not yours, but you just need to understand the terminology and the implications.
Yep. We have a few questions in the chat. So yes, I think the presentation will be sent via email. Right, Liz?
Yeah, I think I've tried to answer most of them as we've gone along, unless you've got any specific questions that someone's sent out to you.
Yeah, so I see one from Robin. I've recently had a customer offer XWorks. I would think that is better again than FCA. Absolutely, XWorks is the best term to not get involved in anything. But again, your importer might have an expectation that you will be actually delivering the cargo somewhere for packing. And if this is the case, then it's not XWorks anymore, it's FCA. So that has to be really clear, because you have to understand, like, your liability stops with XWorks at your premises. So they have to arrange transport to pick up your cargo from your premises and deliver it to nominated hub.
I know the temptation is there to quote XWorks for smaller, newer producers because you don't want anything to do with freight and you don't know what your cost structures are. But I do caution you against that, because the industry standard, again, I keep harping on about this, but the industry standard is very much FOB. That's the expectation from 95% of your customer base overseas. They are going to expect an FOB quote. And keep in mind, obviously, what Lena said about the move towards FCA in some circumstances. If you insist on an XWorks quote, that might be putting up a barrier to your customer to working with you. So just be aware of that. It doesn't stop you from quoting, but you don't want to lose customers either. With temperature control, I'll just reflect on some experiences I've had. By and large, unless your wines are very expensive, very sensitive wines, for most times of the year and most destinations, you will just use a standard dry container with a liner. And I would stress the liner. If you find that a liner has not been set up, that would be highly unusual. With wine shipments, most of them will require those liners to protect, and they do provide a pretty good level of protection, as you can see by those graphs, in smoothing out the temperature fluctuations. Reefers are used for very expensive wines. They are used for certain destinations at certain times of year where it's very hot or very cold. Again, that will be driven by your customer and their choice. I do know that some of the larger retailers in Hong Kong, for example, Watsons, they insist on bringing everything over on reefer. So it will be a decision driven by your customer, but you need to be aware of the implications. One of the other things that or ways that people manage temperature is they look at the routes, the shipping routes. So I used to work with a US importer that did use reefers for 1 month of the year only, but most of the time they just insisted on no transshipments. They wanted to have no ships stopping in Singapore and offloading on hot ports. They wanted to just have no transshipments straight through to their final destination. So that's another way it can be managed.
I would be very wary of that though, Liz, obviously with the current climate.
Yes, good point.
You know,
Probably don't have those choices anymore.
No,
You're right.
no, we don't. No, in fact, they could be double transshipping. So yeah, we just have to be very wary and keep
Right.
that
Yes,
in
I'm
mind.
talking of a time that was quite a few years ago.
Once
actually.
upon a time, yes, in the good old days when it was easy.
So I guess the key is talk to your freight forwarder, right? Find out what the current environment is and what your choices are in terms of protecting your load in terms of temperature and humidity.
We also do offer pallet covers as well. So it's not just, we don't just have liners for the full container, and we can have them sent to the various co-loaders to be popped onto the pallets, or we can arrange to get the pallet cover sent out to the suppliers and then they can pop it on themselves. So there are other options.
And they're relatively inexpensive, aren't they? I had a quote from Lena for one of those fairly recently.
Lena will be able to advise you on that, I guess.
Remember what that was, Lena, just to give people an idea?
Yeah, sure. I can definitely send this info. From my memory, I think it's 75 USD
US,
for
yeah.
a pallet liner, and it's I think is it 400 for a container?
They're about to go up from the 1st of August, but it's roughly
Okay.
about USD 400 for a 20 and
yeah.
USD 600 for a 40 foot. Yeah, but
So
we are finding the pallet covers are becoming more and more popular. That fee includes obviously the supply and the fit of the liner also.
We just had, so if it's a liner, that will be a cost for the buyer. But quite often with an LCL shipment, we just got asked for a liner for a pallet from a buyer in Taiwan. They said, we would like you to cover the cost of the pallet liner for our LCL shipment. That's a useful way to go with LCL shipments.
Yeah, and not just for LCL, we also have some suppliers that will, depending on the product, they will add a liner free of charge. So they will accept the cost to pop that on because they know that the cargo is sensitive.
Yeah. So just to answer Preeti's email, I know that Lena mentioned, yes, the presentation will be sent on to everyone, but I can also, I'll figure out how to get the chat content through to people as well. I noticed she's requested the chat content specifically. Okay, is there any more questions from anyone? If not, I'd like to say a huge thanks to Lena and to Kerry for taking their time today to put together an excellent presentation on shipping and logistics, and just again refer you to them. Their contact details are in their presentation that they put up, and we'll send that on to you. If you've got any questions, let them know. They've got a wealth of experience. I will say I've worked with a lot of freight forwarders in my time, and it is so helpful to work with someone that is specialised in wine specifically. It's a big, big difference. They understand everything around wine and beverage in terms of, the temperature and humidity requirements, the request to load below deck, all of those things. It is a very specific area of shipping. And I'd encourage you to use a freight forwarder like Hillebrand that has that very specific experience. So thank you. And please, everyone, don't forget to have a look through that WA WineX portal. Most of the materials under the shipping and logistics section of the X portal actually are provided by Hillebrand and kept up to date. So we invite you to go back there and use that information, and anyone that has any questions at all on WA Wines to the World please feel free to come back to myself or Darren. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you for everyone. And please reach out anytime. We'll be happy to assist. And hopefully we'll see you sometime soon in person, because I'm really miss traveling to your area. So have a wonderful day, and we'll keep in touch.
Thanks,
Thank
Lena.
you.
Thanks, Kerry.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, everybody.